I recently received a review copy of Pitch Out from Hachette Boardgames UK, and it's a great little flicking game. In fact, it's one of the best I've played. It's simple, it's portable, it's tactical, and it's exciting. It reminded me of all the fun I've had over the years with Catacombs, Cube Quest, Flick 'em Up, and other flicking games. So I thought this would be an opportune time to explore these games a little bit deeper. Which features crop up time and again in these chaotic dexterity games? In this video I'll be looking at 10 mechanisms frequently utilised, and if you fancy designing a flicking game yourself, well, this might be a good place to start. So I'm Adam Porter, I'm a game inventor from Cardiff in Wales, and over recent years I've made many videos covering different mechanisms in game genres. Tile laying games, action selection games, trick-taking games, and most recently tableau building. But I haven't yet done a deep dive into the world of dexterity games. So today we're focusing in on one of the major genres within that little board game niche, flicking. The ancestor of all flicking games is marbles. And of course this isn't really a game, it's a component. It's as nonsensical as saying the ancestor of all deck building games is cards. But I'm not quite sure how else to put it. I'm not a marble historian, I don't know all the many different rule sets used around the globe. I know the one from Squid Game and the one I played as a kid, and that's about it. But I recognise the key role of this component in creating a genre. So various elements of marbles have crept into later flicking games. For example, in marbles, the start player is often determined by each player flicking their marble towards a line, and the player who gets the closest without going over the line plays first. In Pitch Out, players flick their discs towards the edge of the table, and the player who gets closest without going over the edge plays first. In my hometown of Wantage, circa 1988, this was how marbles was played. A circle is drawn on the ground or laid out with string, and a selection of marbles are placed into the centre. Each player has a larger marble, a shooter, which they propel into the circle, attempting to knock the other marbles out. If you're successful, you take another turn, and if unsuccessful, your opponent plays. On subsequent turns, you flick your shooter from its new position within the circle, so any marbles that you knock out of the ring count as points for you. Or if you're playing for keepsies, you claim ownership of them. The game ends when all marbles are knocked out of the ring. The next major innovation in flicking games came in the ancient Indian game of Carom. Now I haven't played Carom, though I'd love to. It resembles the game of billiards, except here we're flicking discs in an attempt to land them into the corner pockets. Like marbles, Carom developed into a wide range of similar games, many coming out of Canada and known as Pishanot games. Crokinole is the most prominent and the most well-loved among modern hobby board gamers. In 1929, the English game designer William Keeling created the game New Footy, a flicking table football game with flat cardboard players which rocked on their weighted plastic bases. In 1949, designer Peter Adolph adapted and improved the game and released his version under the title Subutio. The rivalry between the two products lasted for a decade, but Subutio was ultimately victorious, largely because of the superior manoeuvrability of Adolph's players. Over the next few decades, flicking games became the go-to method of simulating sports on the tabletop. Subutio itself had ill-fated spin-off rugby and hockey editions. And kids in classrooms would play table football with makeshift components, flicking coins across their tables. It wasn't until the mid-90s that another notable title in the genre hit the market. Carabande, also known as Pitch Car, won a Spiel des Jahres award for Best Dexterity Game. It's been a popular title ever since, with players racing to manoeuvre their pucks around a racetrack. In the early 2000s, there was a boom in new board games, and as huge numbers of new titles hit the market, it was inevitable that designers would start to look at flicking games and utilise the mechanism in ingenious new ways. Which brings us to our top 10 mechanisms used in flicking games. And the first is, what playing pieces are you using? So perhaps this is the most pivotal decision to make when designing a flicking game, your starting point. What exactly are you flicking? So many games have continued in the vein of Carom and Crokinole, and discs are such a smooth, predictable shape to propel across the tabletop. It's really satisfying. In Crokinole, the board surface is polished to a high sheen, allowing the discs to almost float across the tabletop with minimal resistance. Zoc Verlag's Safranito has players skimming poker chips across the board. There's no flicking involved in that game, but the motion doesn't feel a world away from the unique shooting technique used in traditional games of marbles. The guys at Brain Games experimented with flicking the wobbly playing pieces from Amigo Spieler's memory game Honigbienchen. They found that they could put spin on the pieces if they hit them from a certain direction, or even cause the pieces to jump if they flicked them on their heads. So these playing pieces were adapted into the penguins featured in their hit children's game Ice Cool, which also won a Spiel des Jahres award, the Kinderspiel. And despite their superficial similarities to the wobbly-based Subutio players, the Ice Cool pieces don't fall over however you propel them. In Cube Quest and Mondrian, players flick dice across the playing surface. These are a little bit harder to control. They don't move as predictably or smoothly as discs or the bowl-shaped bases of Subutio players or Ice Cool penguins, but they have other advantages which we'll come onto in later categories. In the game Attraction, players flick magnets across the tabletop with the intention of attracting other magnets to form a large cluster. Of course, magnets also have the unique property of repelling other magnets, depending on their orientation, creating some fun, dramatic moments in the game. Now, if you're planning on designing a flicking game, you need to decide what sort of playing pieces could your players flick. Number 2, the mechanism or the goal of elimination. A key decision for a game designer, regardless of the genre of game or mechanisms within it, is determining the goal of the game. What is it that players are trying to achieve? So the sport-based flicking games have objectives in common with the sports which they're simulating. In Subutio, you're trying to flick the ball into the net. In Pitch Car, you're trying to cross the finish line before the other players. But most other flicking games have one of two different objectives at their core. So the first is elimination. And in Marbles, you're flicking your playing pieces to try and make contact with the pieces belonging to your opponents, perhaps even to propel them out of the playing area. In Pitch Out, your goal is to eliminate the opponent's captain, or to eliminate all of the player's other pieces so that only their captain remains. In Cube Quest, each player plays with a mixture of different dice, but the only one that truly matters is the king. Each player's king starts the game located in their own castle, protected by friendly cubes, and the goal of the game is to eliminate the enemy king by knocking it off the game board. Mechanism number 3 is the objective of accuracy, the other common goal in flicking games. In one of the Squid Game episodes, players are shooting marbles towards a hole in the dirt, attempting to get as close as possible without falling in. In Safranito, players attempt to land their discs on spice bowls on the board to claim spice cards to make point-scoring recipes. In Crokinole, players are attempting to land their discs in the central circle on the board, or ideally in the small hole at the very centre. Set and Match is an excellent recent sports simulation game which has players flicking a disc back and forth across a tennis court. But of course, if the disc ends out of bounds, then the opposing player scores points, just as in real tennis. Ice Cool features asymmetric goals for the players, so in any given round there's one player playing as hall monitor and all the other players are runners. The hall monitor's job is to make contact with the runners, and the round ends when the hall monitor has contacted every runner. Meanwhile, the runners have a very different accuracy-based goal. They need to slide through the various doorways, collecting the coloured fish above in order to score points. After each player has been hall monitor once, the game ends and points are compared to determine the winner of the game. Designers of flicking games might want to look at alternative goals. Can you think of a goal which doesn't focus on elimination or accuracy? If not, that's not a major problem. There's no harm in falling back on familiar mechanisms. You just need to find a way to make it your own. Mechanism number 4 is using reversible pieces. So one of the great things about discs as playing pieces is that they reverse. When you skim a disc in a game of Safranito, you don't actually reveal the value of the disc. It's hidden on the underside. When the discs are revealed at the round end, the values determine the order in which players can buy and sell spices, and also the prices they receive or pay. Many of the monsters in Catacombs need to be hit twice in order to eliminate them. When such discs are hit, they're flipped to their reverse side to show that they've taken a wound. Of course, flicking cubes and dice gives you multiple surfaces to work with, and this increases the potential design space. In Cube Quest, the surface showing on the uppermost side of your dice when it lands indicates how the dice behaves and what effect it has. So if the dice lands in the opponent's side of the board and it shows a silhouette, there's a chance that it's going to be captured by your opponent. If it's landed in your own territory, well then the cube can stay where it is. But if it lands in your opponent's territory with that silhouette side up, you've got to roll the dice to see if it's captured or whether it escapes. And if the cube escapes, well then it's placed back into your own castle. In Mondrian, players roll, drop or flick dice to try and land them on high-scoring cards and to collect sets of matching colours. The number rolled on the dice is important because you can only collect a card if you've equalled the card's number with your roll, and you have a higher total on the card than any other player. Light and dark turns the flipping of playing pieces into the entire game. At the centre of the play area are 5 torches. When your disc makes contact with a torch, it's flipped to your colour. When your disc makes contact with an opponent's disc, it's also flipped to your colour, and this time it becomes a playable disc for your own future turns. And hence discs flip back and forth, changing ownership throughout the game. The game ends when one player manages to flip all the torches or all opposing discs to their own colour, and that player wins. Number 5, stacking pieces. So this is another benefit of discs and cubes. They can be stacked on top of each other, and this is a recurring power in lots of flicking games. In Cube Quest, freeze cubes can be placed on top of your opponent's pieces, preventing them from being flicked until the freeze cube is knocked off. The shadow power in Pitch Out functions in pretty much exactly the same way, as does the ice shot in Catacombs. In Cube Quest, it's not unusual to see players building multi-level walls from their cubes during setup to protect their king or just to create an imposing presence on the battlefield. Of course, stacking can be used creatively even if you're not limiting yourself to discs and cubes. In Flick 'em Up, wooden cowboys ride horses, which allows them double movement, but the added height also makes them less vulnerable to gunshots. Mechanism number 6, using barriers and terrain. So the rules to Light and Dark suggest that you position household items on the tabletop to create obstacles for your battlefield. Pitch Out comes with plastic squares which form the barriers for the game, but double up as the storage for the discs that are used. Catacombs comes with a variety of different boards with different layouts of large blocking pieces and pits which your pieces could slide into with a range of different effects. Flick 'em Up features the most lavish obstacles and terrain structures. The game comes with a massive box of wooden components, which are used to recreate various Wild West scenarios and shootouts. Each player controls 5 cowboys, who are moved by flicking a disc across the table and then replacing the disc with the cowboy in its new position. Cacti and barrels provide cover for the cowboys, and scenarios allow you to enter buildings by sliding underneath them, with rules for controlling them from within. I think terrain has been underutilised in flicking games thus far. This might be an element that you could lean into in your flicking design to make your game distinct from what's gone before. Number 7 is table edge rules. So one frustration with flicking games is the tendency for playing pieces to shoot off the table and get lost among the dust bunnies behind the game shelves. Catacombs comes with a large cardboard fence which sits around the edge of the board to catch the playing pieces which shoot off the edge. Crokinole has a built-in gutter which catches pieces which fall off the circular board. Pitch Out makes a feature of the table edge. The entire goal of the game is to knock your opponent's pieces off the table. This does result in quite a lot of crawling around on your hands and knees looking for rogue playing pieces. Mechanism number 8 is using different sized pieces. So in Flick 'em Up, players control cowboy figures and they shoot at each other by flicking small discs representing bullets. Additional rules allow players to use differently shaped items to aid their shooting, so the Winchester rifle could be used for accuracy. With expansions, there are even more options. The Gatling gun shoots a bunch of tiny bullets all at once, and a little ramp can be used to give your shot some height when shooting at a cowboy on horseback. Native Americans shoot arrows using a cardboard aiming device, or they throw tomahawks by flicking them from alongside the figure. If you want to catch a horse, you flick a lasso and you attempt to land it between the horse's legs. If you want to mount a horse, you need to slide your movement disc between the horse's legs. Catacombs similarly has heroes shooting different sized discs for ranged attacks. It's a really immersive, thematic system. It's really satisfying to shoot a tiny disc at the enemy before flicking your hero disc behind some blocking terrain to take cover. Catacombs makes a big feature of differently sized discs. Rats and snakes are represented by tiny pieces. Dragons and other bosses are massive by comparison. There's even a humongous gelatinous cube piece with its own unique rules for play. Number 9 is special powers. So Pitch Out assigns special powers to each of the discs. In the basic game, there are 5 discs used. The Assassin eliminates opposing players when it makes contact with them instead of needing to knock them off the table as usual. The Runner can be flicked twice in a single turn, so long as it doesn't make contact with anyone on its first flick. The Guard can be removed in place of another piece to prevent them from being eliminated. The Immortal cannot be eliminated from the game by falling off the table edge on its own turn. And the Captain can utilise the power of any of your other playing pieces which have already been eliminated. The advanced game of Pitch Out allows players to select a variety of additional elite playing pieces with differing abilities. And Cube Quest works very similarly. The various cubes included in the box each have different powers, and players form their own team at the start of the game by selecting the abilities they wish to use. In Light and Dark, each player has 1 or 2 randomly selected special power cards, which allow the player a one-off bonus to be used at any point in the game. Now, Catacombs has an enormous variety of different heroes, monsters and bosses, all with different unique powers. So some pieces can shoot fireballs, or use area templates to damage opponents, or move in some special way, or teleport across the board. So mechanism number 10 is a variable setup. Cube Quest and Pitch Out introduce variety by allowing players to select a team of tokens with different powers each game. Catacombs and Flick 'em Up go one step further. They introduce scenarios. So in Catacombs, players work through a series of dungeons, each with different monsters in them. They can purchase upgrade items, weapons and abilities between dungeons and build up to fighting big bosses. It's a massive, rich, immersive system, and the sheer amount of content between the base game and the various expansions can be overwhelming. Flick 'em Up is similarly ambitious. Each game is based on a scenario chosen from the enclosed book, and they play very differently, with totally different thematic goals. There's no doubt that flicking games aren't for everybody. There's a high degree of skill involved, particularly with the precision flicking which can be achieved with the ice-cool penguins or with crokinole discs on that highly polished surface. And if you're not great at flicking, or if you simply don't enjoy it, well, no amount of scenarios or variable player powers are going to make the game fun for you. But if you're open to dexterity games as a genre, there's a lot to explore here. If you just want something light and breezy, then Attraction or Ice Cool would be ideal for you. If you're looking for something portable, Light and Dark or Pitch Out are great. For a competitive head-to-head, well, Set and Match is incredibly tense, regardless of whether you're a tennis fan or not. But for something a little bit more offbeat, Mondrian or Safranito are both loads of fun, although they're probably quite hard to come by right now. And if you want to get in deep, well, there is a ton to explore in Catacombs and Flick 'em Up. If you're looking to design a flicking game, hopefully you've found some ideas in this video which you could utilise, or subvert, to create something of your own. Please leave me a comment below, let me know what your favourite flicking game is and why you love it. Is there one that I've just missed and I really ought to be playing? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you'll be kept up to date on videos like this. Until next time, all the best.